It was a great program last evening, and it was a delight to be here. And as always, thanks to Deborah, Chad, and Roberto. You guys do an amazing job putting this event together. I know how much work goes behind the scenes. So first, I want to express our gratitude for bringing us all here. So I want to start off with that. This panel is going to be interesting because, we all know that industry is rapidly changing. Universities are changing. Countries are changing. And in this landscape of change, because of digitalization, you could call it digitalization, but digital was here several years ago, and it's only accelerating. If you term it as technology, right from Stone Age, we have had technologies, right? So Stone Age, Industrial Age, Information Age. And so basically what we are talking about is the acceleration of technologies. That's what we're talking about. And what does it mean for industries of the future, economies of the future, institutions, academic institutions of the future, etc. And that's what we're going to focus today with this fantastic panel that we have with us today. We're very fortunate to have the panelists. In a moment, we'll engage with them. What I wanted to preface with is the following. If you look at change, the only constant is change, by the way. And if you look at industries, and you can look at industries as maybe stratified into three different major areas, what I call the human touch industries. At least for now, I want to go to my barber and be with a human touch. Who knows when I will submit myself to a machine. And then there are these industries where the human-machine symbiosis works really well, where technology is used in certain areas, humans then complement, and that symbiotic relationship is evolving as we go into the future. And then there are the industries which are getting taken over by technologies completely, right? And all this spectrum of what we are talking about is also shifting all the time. And that's where we are in reality today. Then we talk about the academic institutions. And shamelessly, I will plug Arizona State University is one of those universities which is transforming itself in terms of how do you prepare not only people for the future, how do you make universities a central part of economic development ecosystems? And not just economic, social, cultural, that you take responsibility for the region, the nation, and the globe in terms of what you do day in and day out. So there is a university transformation that's part of this. And in the midst of all of this, you will find that digital age brings about also digital divide. You have the haves and have-nots. We always have had that. But digital somehow seems to have, made it much more pronounced, particularly in the developing parts of the world. How do you mitigate that? How do you provide opportunities with access as a significant component of our thinking? And lastly, we need concrete examples so that you walk away saying that this is what is happening in some parts of the world. And that's what is going to be discussed by the panelists today. This is a summary of our panel today, if you may. So I'm going to start off with our esteemed panelist, Peter Smith. He was introduced already. He's the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of Southampton, and they're doing some amazing things there. Adham Nadim, CEO of Nadim Industries. The best way of explaining Adham, I don't have to do anything. You just looked at the fantastic thing he did yesterday, which was the award. That explains who Adham is. He's really an innovator at heart. So that's the best way of explaining Nadim. Adham, brother. Okay. And then Bader Al-Abdali. Bader essentially leads now the Office of Competitiveness in the country of Oman. And last but not the least, we have Guillermo Jaim Etcheverry. And Guillermo is the president of the National Academy of Education of Argentina. So when I talk about examples, there are two countries who can talk about what they are doing and what they aspire to do. So that's how we are going to move forward with this panel. So why don't I give the mic and the floor to Peter Smith to walk off with a couple of minutes of introduction of your thoughts along these lines, and then we'll go with specific questions, and maybe we'll have some questions from the audience too following that. Peter?
Thank you very much. So I think this is a really, really fascinating topic. And as you say, there's one way of thinking about this is a spectrum, which is from human touch through to things which are highly digital. But in thinking about this question, I think there's something which is more of maybe a 2x2. And maybe it's the professor in me, but I can't resist. If there was a whiteboard or a blackboard, I would be up there writing on it. So by way of a prop, as I see it, there's a sort of whether you can see that on the screen. No, you can't. What I'm thinking about is there's industries, and there's old industries, and there's new industries. And then we've got, in terms of digitalization, we've got low digitalization, and we've got high digitalization. So it's not so much just a spectrum, but we're in that space. And I think if you think about the challenges, whether it's the challenge for government or the challenge for industry or higher education, society generally, you can kind of think in that way. And so if you go with the idea of the old industry or an existing industry or an existing service, it's all about how do we digitalize that? So that's things like how do we introduce expert systems into medicine, for example, or that's enabled by the technology developing. So that would be things like, we hear a lot about AI, deep machine learning. So that's areas like transportation, where you can think about how's that going to transform going forwards as we get more and more computing power. Of course, there are some industries which are low digitalization, and these may be the human touch ones. You talked about going and having a haircut. That's not a problem I personally have, but that's somewhere where it's hard to imagine some of those service industries becoming highly digitalized. But I think in lots of ways, the most interesting quadrant is the ones which are new businesses that are going to develop, and they're going to develop as technology develops new capability. And I think if you go to Silicon Valley, if you go to San Jose and you look at the buildings around you, those companies, most of them, would not have been something you would even understood what they did 30 years ago. And so one of the things I think we would be thinking about with digitalization is there's going to be a lot of new jobs and a lot of new potential going forwards. So just as a way of framing this conversation, I think that 2x2 is the way I would suggest we think about it.
Thank you, Peter. Adham, I think you're well positioned to talk about this concept of access. I think what you've been observing, I think the Arab Spring in Egypt, I think was a great calling in terms of the haves and the have-nots, trying to see how they can even it all out. And the post-Arab Spring and what's going on in Egypt is of great interest to me specifically, but also I'm sure many others in the audience here. So what's really going on there? These are things that I think will be very valuable for you to weigh in on.
Thank you, Panch. When I come to these meetings all over the world, I go home with a bit of schizophrenia, because we are here discussing AI, teaching coding, and state-of-the-art cutting-edge technology. And then I go back and you look at the state of things, and it's a bit different. So I thought of bringing some of that over with me today so that we could share together a different perspective. Now, I'll give you a cross-section of what's happening at Nadim, for example. We have designers at Nadim that are each working on a $2,000 to $4,000 computer. Depending on their experience, this is equal to 3 to 12 months' pay. Stretching this to the minimum labor wage in Egypt, this could go as far as 10 years' salary, just the computer they're working on. Turning a computer into a luxury commodity far beyond the reach of the average, thus creating a huge cultural and technological divide in a country struggling to provide decent basic elementary education. And by basic, I refer to desk, chair, and blackboard. This becomes a huge challenge, putting an enormous load on graduates and businesses alike. Saving up to buy a simple $200 computer becomes a family mission. Though giving the successful access to basic social media and web surfing interactions, this does little to building cutting-edge technological advances. Obviously, those employed in the design department have had access to private education and have come in contact with technology as it developed, being from upper-class families. Profiling them would put them in the top 1% of job seekers in a market pouring out more than 1 million new graduates every year. Access to technology is becoming more and more important to the formation of young talent. Making that technology affordable to a larger public is the challenge we all have to face. In this age of connectivity and digitalization, more and more analog jobs will be lost to automation and artificial intelligence. Companies in developing nations that aspire to be globally competitive have to deal with such issues in-house. Public education for years to come will be operating with a hindering lag. The concept of continuous education is now key to the success of any workforce. With digitization and AI, redundancy will become a socio-economic disabling issue. Existing companies will see the shift from having a skilled to an unskilled labor force. This is a workforce that had secured its foothold for years or even decades. When public education is not addressing the issue of continuous education at large, let alone starting out with a widening gap in supply and demand of true state-of-the-art talent, you can expect developing nations that are struggling with educational budgets to quickly slide down the competitiveness index. We will see competitive companies in non-competitive countries. They will be exceptions. They will be operating on self-created islands of excellence. The need for skill and talent will be very focused and localized. More and more private in-house centers and support centers to fill this gap will be coming up. A parallel educational system will be arising, creating a totally new social structure, offering a new venue for social mobility. Today, in any developing nation, working for a multinational corporation that has invested in its local workforce creates a branded employee very much in demand. This formula creates a shift from sourcing talent from educational institutions that produce the branded graduates to a more company-based, experienced and seasoned employee, naturally headhunted by the competition. For Nadim, the challenge is not only in the design department. With the introduction of modern state-of-the-art machinery on the job floor, it is becoming more and more difficult to find operators for this new wave of technology. It goes without saying, we have to train them in-house. As for the programmers and maintenance crew for such machines, there's not a single local educational institution that is up to date with what we need. Consequently, we have to take midway engineers that have been trained on 20-year-old technology and start from there. No way will mass education keep up with industry and its continuous adoption of new technologies. It is imperative that policymakers acknowledge that any true educational advancement will only happen through collaboration with industry. As simple as that may be, and as much as it has been tested and developed in many countries, the idea is not yet fully developed in developing countries. An innovation lab in collaboration with industry, combining public and private spending, developed on one campus will eventually yield positive results. The real challenge is to scale that up to produce 1 million graduates a year. Bringing artificial intelligence into mass education will obviously unleash quality state-of-the-art education to a wider public. Again, the question remains, who can afford it? It's an ongoing debate now in a country like Egypt, where we find that private businesses and private institutions are more and more going to creating their own educational system parallel to the state-run system. And I think that's something we can discuss further.
I look forward to the discussion. Better, from the country of Oman, your perspective in terms of what you're doing as a country.
Okay. We'll talk about Oman, how we make a digital transformation in a plan. First of all, we have strategy. In 2003, we start this strategy. and we have ITA, Information Technology Authority, that take care about this strategy. And this strategy, as we know, we have, my colleagues say that we have challenge, and also we have challenge in Oman. First of this challenge, most of our officer, they didn't know how to use the computer because they have all the education. So before they didn't have that computer and computer skills, they didn't have it. So the first of all strategy to spare the skills computers to all Oman. So this strategy and this plan have for 3-5 years to spare these skills for the to how to use computers, because we'll improve ourselves and our skills and our website to do this strategy. So that's first of all what we do it to improve our skills in this technology. After that, the ITA do provide computers and programs for all entities, government entities and ministries to have these computers and these programs will let the government and staff to work in this technology, and we can after that improve our website and our service and make our service as electronic service. So that's what we do it in Oman for the first of strategy. After that, we have to improve our telecommunication and technology, because if we don't have any internet in all Oman, we can't use this technology. So we'll private sector and government sector, public sector work together to do this issue. And now I think more than 70% of Romanis and citizens use internet. So that's good impression to improve our service. And we know now all of us use smartphone. So now we work in this technology. We move from electronic to smart phone to use this technology, and to because this wave for digitalization transformation need these skills and needs to use smartphone, because we need to go to the citizen to use this technology. So now our service, we can do it in our home. Some of our services, private and public sectors, like banker, now we can use transfer money, and a lot of private service now have it in as smartphone and smart application. That's what we do it in Oman in this strategy. Also, we prove our we do cloud service, government cloud service. We have law for the for how to use information and for the personality, and to because all of one use this technology, so we need to secure this information to secure this information, personal information and government information. Also now, we plan for Oman 2040. So now we have another strategy, because we finished about this strategy, which started from 2003 till now, and we start other strategy, Oman. With Oman planning for 2040, and we have a lot of we educate and we have a lot of things and mistakes, what we do it that old strategy, and how to improve this new strategy for 2040.
Thank you very much, Badr. Guillermo, Guillermo said something earlier when we were talking. He said that before taking this role, he was a president of a small university with 300,000 students. So we were talking about it, and he said something even more interesting. He said it runs 4 hospitals. Is that right, Guillermo? And there's a saying in the US, if you have one hospital that you run as part of the university, that's close to hell. If you run 2 hospitals, definite hell. Now, he said he's running 4 hospitals. He ran 4 hospitals. I don't know what to call that. But in any event, Guillermo, I think your experience as president of a university, a large university clearly, as well as now as the president of the Academy of Education, I would like to hear your thoughts in terms of what's happening in Argentina, what the plans are, challenges, opportunities, and your plans.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. With 1 hospital is enough, I can tell you. Here we face a very difficult problem because we have 30% of our population is below the poverty line. And the important part of our population is at the first world level. So we have to provide education for a very complex array of people. And I think that one of the ways to face that challenge is to recognize that the important thing still is the people. Still are we. We are the important ones. So the technology adds possibilities, capabilities to us. So the important part of the education is to build the population with the capacity to understand the world and to use that technology for the well-being of themselves, of their families, and of the country. This is a very difficult task because, just to give a couple of numbers, every 100 children that enters the primary school, only 50 finish high school. And of those 50 that finish, 25 have very difficult times in understanding what they read. So this is the challenge that we face, not only in our countries, in many countries of the world. So I think we risk to devote a lot of work and of interest in the development of technology, but it is important to use that work in the development of the people that are going to use that technology. Smartphones are not intelligent, as we tend to believe. They don't transmit intelligence to the user. The user can be intelligent or dumb, but the important thing is the user of the technology. And I think that the major aim of the education is to build people with the capacities to understand themselves and the world. This is a very good time to educate someone and to give them, to give the children the abilities that are the same abilities that we knew in the past, exploring the humanities, the social sciences, the formal sciences, because these disciplines are the ones that provide the student with the basis to understand the functioning of the social environment and of human beings. So I think that we are facing this challenge. We are entering in an age in which we are leaving behind the idea of the super specialization and trying to build people with the flexibility to behave and to work in a world that is constantly changing. And this flexibility is provided by a very wide array of subject matters in education.
Thank you very much, Guillermo. In the interest of time, what I'm going to do is, instead of my questions, I'm going to dive into, and some of these questions are aligned with what I was going to ask. This is from Jean-Francois. What do you think are the foundational skills that students in the present day should learn in order to be able to acquire work-specific skills while in the job market later on, right? So I would say not only work, but life skills too. So this is an interesting question because, Suresh is here. Purdue recently acquired Kaplan. We are, at ASU, we have a very large learning, framework. We have over 140 technology partners. Increasingly, universities are getting into the business of not only educating people for today and tomorrow that go through the university system, but also reaching into the workforce and seeing how you might help people retrain and train and retrain and reskill and upskill and all that for the future. So I think universities are taking more responsibility for the, as I was saying earlier, the economic development responsibilities that we have. Increasingly, it's a good thing for the region and the nation. So given that, why don't we start with Adham? Adham, what are your thoughts in terms of the kinds of skills that people need to learn related to this question?
We tend to overlook that there are 12 years of education prior to university, and they have an important role as well. Yesterday, it was brought up, the subject by Deborah, that there was this tragic accident in Brazil, and 95% of the population were totally ignorant that Brazil had that kind of a museum before it burned down. Now, I think that's an educational problem, and it is. What we're teaching people right now in schools and universities will be totally different from what we will be needing to teach them in 5 years. But the personal touch and the humane element of education is what we really need to get there, because everything else can be acquired either through companies or through continued education. But it's the formation of the mind itself that is key here. And I say this at Nadim, when we get even the 1% graduates that join us in the design team, we discover that they are living in Cairo and they have not visited the museum and have not been to the pyramids. So I don't think that is that should be a role that industry should be taking. That we should educate people on these basic things. It is. I think that's vital. This is what will make the difference. This is what will eventually have a person beat the computer at chess. Is getting all that through the 12 years of education prior to university, and then continuing that at a higher level in university.
No, thank you very much. In the interest of time, I'm going to jump to a few questions here, so that we don't have every question answered by all the panelists. Sometimes that's the style that is used. So the sort of an associated question to what Adham said is, how do universities prepare people for the future? How do they configure themselves? I often say that if universities are not examples themselves, if you are trying to create not only skill sets and mindsets in people, if you are not global, if you are not entrepreneurial, if you are not innovative, if you don't express those as or technologically savvy in the institution, if you are not all of that as an institution, how do you expect your students are going to get that, imbibe those skills? It's not something that is taught. It is something that the university has to be an exemplar, right? In the Indian system, it used to be many years ago, the gurukuls, where you not just preach, but you practice and preach. So it's the same thing. Universities have to be in not only preaching business, but also practice and preach. And so how do universities, for example, at ASU, we have broken down the silos and so on. Again, I won't go into this pitch about ASU, but it's important that universities, where the skill sets are being, and mindsets, I'm hoping, are being, provided for students to go through the system, and then students who are continuing to engage through, the skill set that they acquire when they are in the workforce. So, Peter, you may want to reflect upon that as an academic coming from an institution which is doing some of that. So, I would love to hear your thoughts, and then Guillermo, I would love to hear your thoughts too on this.
Thank you. Yes, I think this is a fascinating question. Behind the universities, we have a whole lot of other associated activities. So we have the learned societies. So we have people, we have disciplines, and we have a the academics, the students have an identity typically. And then we have professional societies, so chartered accountants or being a registered lawyer. And I think what's very interesting is if we look at the university sector today, some universities are still very much living in the past. Some universities, on the other hand, are being very broad and very inclusive. So a nice example of this, a colleague of mine teaches at Harvard, and he does a course which is on app programming. And this course is so successful that the humanities departments are unhappy because too much transfer of teaching money is going across to the engineers. But what it really represents is that the humanities students at Harvard are recognizing that if they want to be in a new Facebook, they need to learn how to program apps. So we have some examples of universities which are very flexible. But then again, we have another, and I go to another personal example. My nephew was studying, or has studied, engineering at Cambridge, obviously one of the top, things that one can study for engineering. Because he did so well, he had the opportunity of going to MIT for a year. And he nearly didn't go to MIT for the year, because by going to MIT, he wasn't following the accreditation of the civil engineers. So it's now difficult for him to become an accredited civil engineer because he went to MIT. Now, my advice was, Andrew, go to MIT. You're going to get so much more from going to MIT. Your CV will be fantastic with Cambridge and MIT. But he nearly didn't go. Now, and that's what I mean about behind this. It's not just the universities, it's the professional bodies, and it's the other disciplines. And I think one of the challenges we universities need to ask ourselves is, are we really preparing the students that someone like Amazon or Google need? Or are we still living in a discipline-based? And I think that's where there's going to be a lot of churn, a lot of change in universities. Some will get that and some won't. And I think going to Adham's point about industry, that in some sense, industry is stepping in, because that way you get the students with the skills you need, rather than maybe leaving it to traditional universities.
Guillermo, as a university president and what you're doing in Argentina, it would be great to hear your views here.
The university is already late. I think that we should develop the abilities before then. After 12 years of education, it's incredible that someone doesn't understand what they read or cannot make a simple calculation, hasn't the ability of develop abstract thinking. So I think the effort should be put before the university. And then the university should give, in my view, a broad education, giving the ability to change the way that you see reality. So perhaps a good graduate should have a good physics, a good philosophy, biology, and history, not with the idea of becoming historians, physicists, mathematicians, but with the idea of having different ways to attack reality, to understand. This, I think, is important. And it's important to have knowledge, because now it's becoming very popular, the idea that we should be able to learn to learn. The modern mantra of education is learn to learn. We always were trained as learners. We always were trained as animals learning to learn. The difference was that in the past, we learned to learn learning something. And now, apparently, we've discovered the idea that we can learn to learn without learning anything. So I think that's important. We have this idea that we will find in the databases what we need. That's true. Before, we found everything in the books. But nobody had the idea, said, don't study because everything is in the book. Everything changes very fast. But what doesn't change is the basic understanding, the basic process by which you transform information into knowledge. And this is learned in the educational system. This, I think, is the plus that the educational system gives you. If you now ask me to to explain the audience the Pythagoras theorem, I couldn't do it. I have a vague idea. But in any case, I know that I can do this type of development, that I can do this type of process, that I have that ability. And I think this is the major aim that education should have, to give you the possibility, the view of what you can do. This, I think, is important. Nowadays, when I speak about education, I'm using a very old definition. It's by Hesiod, a poet contemporary to Homer, 2,800 years ago. And he says, to educate a person is to help him or her to develop what he or she can be. And I think this is a very important thing to have in mind. The university adds to that, adds knowledge, and should add the basic knowledge. Because even to be creative, innovative, as nowadays we want everyone to be, you must know something. And you must have this, you must know and have this in your interior, in every judgment, in every phrase that you say, you show what you have inside. So a university should be interested in developing the inside of the persons.
Excellent points, Guillermo. Thank you very much. You know, in all of this, it's as they say, it takes a village. So increasingly, if there is a time that is calling for this, is the partnership of university, industry, and government coming together and working as a team, right? And so that's the most important thing, I think, in order to evolve everyone, the universities, the economic development ecosystem, the government itself, and the industry. So, Peter, I want to pick your brains on this one. You talked about this in your prefacing comments a little bit. What is the role from your point of view, as the entity in Oman that is trying to bring this all together? What do you think is a role for in agencies like your National Competitiveness Office in Oman?
For this situation, we have, as government, we plan to make survey for the biggest companies in Oman. I think our will take more than 100 companies, and we'll ask them about future skills that they needed, and about what they think about some of job will disappear in future. As I say before in the bank, some of jobs will disappear, and also we know the Kodak company. Kodak company didn't transform with this technology, so this company lose the market. Also, BlackBerry and Nokia. These companies, they didn't go with these waves of technology, so others brand take now the market. So in our competitiveness office, we'll have this survey, and after the survey, we'll know what the skills we needed and what the specialists for colleagues and university what we needed, and also we'll share this information for the study and education, because the primary education is the base of skills and educate. So if we have the base, we'll have for the future the skills, and we can improve this. And also last year Oman published Oman Technology Funds. That funds take care about Omani's students in higher education, what they have improved their application, and they have idea, and they need to do this idea to as companies, and this funds like and also Engage Oman. This is same. It's like competitive between education student in higher education. They competitive between the idea, and they take one of this idea and improve this idea to make companies. And last month, they one of these companies win, and they will share this with the Arab country. And this name of this company is Nawa. They make from some of that, not we use it in wasting, and we know the balance dates. So some of these dates have inside it that what wasting and not use it. So they make from this they make food for the animals. So that's one of what we do it in the future in Oman, and how we educate our students.
Excellent, thank you. That's a good example. So there are a few more questions, but I'm going to, I think we have 13 seconds here. So I'm going to go with this question as, how do training expenses hit your bottom line? And that's for Adham. How do training expenses hit your bottom line? You know, increasingly companies like Starbucks and others are getting their employees trained. So how does it affect your bottom line?
I think it's something you have to do, but regardless of the cost, we don't have an option, because you either have the talent or make the talent. Now, I wanted to just mention something, because it could sound like the solution is that industry will take over education. I don't think that's really the solution, and it's 1% of graduates come from private education in Egypt, and that's 10,000 in a million every year. So if industry steps in and starts opening up schools and universities, we might double that number. So that's going to be 20,000 in a million. Over 10 years, we're going to have maybe an extra 100,000 versus 10 million going through the traditional system. So this is the real dilemma. How do we scale up education, of quality education that industry needs to cover this huge gap? I think that's the challenge.
Thank you, Adham. We are almost out of time. The red thing is blinking here. So here's what I'm going to do. In 10 seconds or 15 seconds, one thought that you want people to walk away with from all of this panel discussion. Peter.
I think really it's about the importance of education and training. It's just critical that countries, governments, just take this seriously and create the right incentives to get things to happen.
I think we all need to focus on how to create proper access to quality education.
The education is more than we need it for future, and we have two specialists in data analysis and programmers to improve ourselves in future.
The important thing is to develop talent. The digital transformation is quite easy.